The dawn sky over Naval Station Norfolk was painted in streaks of pale gold and bruised purple, the rising sun glinting off the endless rows of gray warships moored along the piers. The air carried the familiar smell of salt, diesel, and discipline, a mixture that had, for generations, defined life on the East Coast's largest naval installation. Mara Cole moved through the maze of steel and concrete like a ghost, her oversized sunglasses reflecting the early morning light and hiding the sharp green eyes that had once unnerved even her closest comrades. Every step she took was calculated, every movement deliberate. The uniform she wore, belonging to a junior maintenance officer, fit perfectly, yet it was a costume, a mask she hoped no one would see through. Her heart hammered like the twin engines of a Hornet fighter jet roaring overhead, and the clipboard she carried seemed heavier than it should have, weighed down by the secrets it didn't actually hold. The uniform, the badge, the sunglasses, they were all props in an elaborate deception, one that had brought her back to a place she had sworn never to return. Years had passed since she disappeared from the radar, leaving only whispers and rumors. But now, after a decade spent in shadows, hiding under aliases, she was here for one purpose: to observe, to record, and to confirm what intelligence had hinted at, a betrayal that threatened to unravel the very fleet she had once sworn to protect. The hangar bay was alive with motion. Sailors moved in precise, automatic steps, their boots echoing against the concrete like the pulse of a living organism. Cranes lifted sections of jet fuselages into place, engineers checked dials and gauges with meticulous care, and drones hovered silently, recording every angle. Mara slipped between workstations, nodding politely when her path intersected with others, jotting notes on her clipboard, all the while pretending to study electrical schematics she had never learned. She felt the tension under her skin, a low hum that wouldn't dissipate, a reminder that at any moment her ruse could be uncovered. Then she heard it. A laugh, clear and sharp, threading through the mechanical symphony of the hangar like a sudden melody in a war drum. Her blood froze. It wasn't just any laugh. It was familiar, unmistakable, and it carried the weight of memories she had tried desperately to bury. She turned her head, letting the sunglasses shield the recognition in her eyes, and saw him. From the balcony above the hangar, commanding with effortless authority, stood Admiral Grant. The man who had once been her mentor, her confidant, the one person who had known Mara before the world had made her vanish. Grant was speaking into his radio, issuing instructions with calm precision, unaware that the woman beneath the borrowed uniform was listening, heart thundering. His voice, a low, deliberate baritone, echoed off the metal beams, cutting through the hum of machinery. Mara pressed the clipboard closer to her chest, her fingers tightening around it until the paper crinkled. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind, yet nothing could prepare her for the intensity of being this close, the heat of familiarity, the surge of emotions she had tried to suppress for a decade. She reminded herself to breathe. She reminded herself that no one else could know who she was, not yet. Mara's mind raced, replaying every encounter she had ever had with Grant. The late-night strategy sessions, the laughter shared over coffee in empty corridors, the tense moments in war zones where trust had been the difference between life and death. And now, standing in disguise, she realized that her past was no longer just a memory. It was a risk, a live wire threatening to ignite at any second. The Admiral's gaze swept the hangar, commanding, calculating. He stopped, scanning the workstations below. His eyes briefly met Mara's, though she quickly lowered her head, pretending to read a schematic, and something passed in that fraction of a second, something she couldn't quite name. Recognition, suspicion, a flicker of memory. Her pulse surged. If he saw through her, if he connected the dots too early, everything could collapse. Mara moved, fluid and silent, toward a maintenance ladder that led to the upper catwalks, hopping to create distance between herself and the Admiral while maintaining surveillance. She had rehearsed this exit route dozens of times, mapped every corridor, every doorway, every blind spot. Yet even as she climbed, a nagging doubt gnawed at her. She wasn't just observing the base. She was walking a tightrope over a pit of secrets, a misstep away from being discovered, not just as an intruder, but as someone who had vanished from the eyes of everyone who had ever trusted her. Below, the hum of activity didn't waver, but the tension in the air had thickened, subtle yet palpable. Radios crackled with routine updates. The sounds of forklifts and heavy machinery blended into a constant mechanical drone, but Mara felt it like a drumbeat syncing with her own heartbeat. She stopped on the catwalk, leaning against the railing, pretending to check wiring, while her ears strained for any sign that she had been noticed. Then she heard it again, the same laugh, closer this time, and her stomach dropped. It wasn't directed at her, yet it held the power to unravel years of preparation. The Admiral's voice, low and deliberate, cut through the air, addressing someone off camera. "I need all units accounted for. Now." His tone carried the weight of command, the authority of decades of experience. Mara's throat went dry. Her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted the sunglasses over her eyes. She had thought she could suppress her past, bury it beneath layers of disguise and aliases, but hearing his voice, seeing his form against the morning light, reminded her of what she had lost and what she still risked losing. She had survived years in the shadows, evaded capture, and collected the intelligence she needed. Yet none of that mattered if the Admiral, the one person who could recognize her instantly, put the pieces together before she completed her mission. A shadow moved across the catwalk and Mara stiffened. A young sailor was passing by, whistling softly, oblivious to the storm brewing in her chest. She forced a smile, nodded politely, and kept moving. Her heart was a drumbeat, a relentless rhythm that no amount of pretense could silence. She needed to focus, to maintain the illusion that she was just another face among the thousands who kept the base running. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. From the command balcony, Admiral Grant paused mid-instruction, tilting his head slightly as if sensing a shift in the air. His gaze lingered longer than necessary, and Mara felt it, a prickling awareness crawling across her skin. Somewhere deep in his mind, recognition flickered, a spark igniting memories long suppressed. She felt the pulse of tension stretch taut, a thread holding back an avalanche of truth. The hangar felt suddenly smaller, more suffocating. Engines roared in the distance, the whine of machinery harmonizing with the pounding of her heart. She adjusted her clipboard once more, letting it shield her chest, hiding the trembling beneath calculated calm. Her breath caught in her throat as the Admiral's voice boomed again, calling for all personnel to confirm positions immediately. Mara froze, every instinct screaming at her to move, to escape, to vanish. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not until she had what she came for. And she couldn't afford mistakes. Not when a single misstep could unravel everything she had spent years building. Not when the man who once trusted her completely was standing only feet away, on the edge of recognition, poised to expose her or worse, question her motives in front of everyone. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The metallic clang of tools echoed like a heartbeat. The distant roar of jet engines became a thunderous drum. And through it all, that laugh lingered, light, melodic, unforgettable, and Admiral Grant's voice carried across the hangar, a single word cutting through the chaos: coal. The syllable was casual, almost offhand, but it hit Mara like a shot. She froze, her body rigid, every nerve screaming. The world narrowed to that single sound, that single recognition, and in that instant she knew nothing could ever be the same again. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she realized that the mission she had meticulously planned, the disguise she had perfected, and the years she had spent in shadow, all of it, was about to collide with the past she had run from. And standing there, hidden behind oversized sunglasses and borrowed authority, she knew the next seconds could change everything. The Admiral's eyes never left hers. A whisper of memory danced in his gaze, and Mara, for the first time in 10 years, felt truly exposed. Mara pressed herself against the cool steel of a maintenance tunnel, the dim glow of overhead lights casting elongated shadows that flickered like phantoms across the walls. She clutched her clipboard to her chest, fingers tightening until the paper crinkled under her grip. Every breath she took sounded too loud in the sudden silence, a thunderclap echoing in the narrow space. Outside, the hum of the hangar continued, but the energy had shifted. The Admiral's gaze had caught hers, and for the first time in a decade, Mara felt the icy weight of recognition pressing down on her. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind. She had imagined the confrontation, imagined the questions, imagined the possibility of escape. But nothing could have prepared her for the visceral shock of seeing the man she had trusted with her life realize she was here, alive, and in disguise. Her heart pounded in rhythm with the distant rumble of engines and the metallic clangs of sailors moving through the hangar. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, yet she remained rooted, pretending to examine the cables that ran along the walls like veins of a living organism. Admiral Grant's voice, deep and commanding, cut through the hum. "Lieutenant Alvarez," he called, using the alias she had assumed, "report your position. Immediately." The calm authority in his tone sent a ripple of panic through her chest. She had hoped her disguise would shield her, that the uniform, the sunglasses, the borrowed identity would be enough. But the way he said her false name, it was precise, deliberate, and edged with a suspicion she could not ignore. Mara swallowed, forcing herself to respond in the measured cadence she had practiced. "Section B3, sir. Routine maintenance check." Her voice was steady, professional. She avoided looking up, letting her eyes scan non-existent schematics as if nothing was amiss. Yet beneath her calm exterior, panic threatened to surge. One wrong inflection, one hesitation, and everything, her mission, her cover, her life, could unravel. Footsteps echoed closer, deliberate and heavy, reverberating against the steel walls. Security teams were converging, likely following Grant's command. Mara's mind raced. She had prepared escape routes, backup plans, even contingencies for capture. But these halls, with their narrow passages and abrupt turns, felt suffocating now. Every shadow seemed to watch, every echo a herald of discovery. She pressed herself flat against the wall, forcing her breathing to a whisper, and waited. A shadow fell across her boots. She looked up, forcing a casual glance as if noticing a routine inspection. It was a young sailor, clipboard in hand, checking the cables like she pretended to. He nodded politely, muttering something about routine checks, and moved along. Mara exhaled silently. It was only a matter of time, she knew, before the Admiral's attention focused entirely on her. Every second she stayed, every breath she took was a gamble. From the balcony above, the Admiral's eyes scanned the corridors with an almost supernatural precision. Mara knew his instincts were razor-sharp. He had spent decades commanding men in life-and-death situations, reading body language, detecting deception. She felt his gaze brush over her like a cold wind, and in that instant, her carefully constructed mask threatened to slip. Memories surged unbidden. Nights in the field where one misstep had meant death, missions where trust was the only currency, moments where she had leaned on Grant's judgment without question. Her pulse surged as he began descending the stairwell toward the tunnel. Mara's hands shook slightly, gripping the clipboard harder. She had to act natural, blend in, survive. Yet every step he took reverberated through the corridor like a drumbeat of impending doom. The tunnel, once a place of safety and secrecy, now felt like a cage, trapping her between exposure and flight. Grant paused mid-step, head tilting slightly as if sensing a subtle disturbance in the rhythm of the bass. He scanned the corridor, eyes narrowing, body rigid with trained awareness. Mara's stomach knotted. Could he feel her presence as more than a technician? Could he sense the truth hiding beneath the uniform? Every fiber of her being screamed that the moment of revelation was imminent. She swallowed hard, forcing her breathing to a calm, mechanical rhythm, pretending to examine the cables with exaggerated focus. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant hum of machinery and the faint hiss of hydraulics. Then he spoke softly, almost to himself, yet loud enough for her to hear. "Coal." The single word, barely audible, struck her like a bolt of lightning. Her body froze, every muscle taut. It was not her alias. It was her real name, the name that had vanished from his life a decade ago. Recognition, sharp and undeniable, burned in his voice. Mara forced herself to maintain composure. Her hands tightened on the clipboard, her knuckles whitening. She swallowed, lowered her gaze to the cables, and tried to mask the surge of emotion threatening to betray her. He had recognized her, at least in part. One word, one intonation, had shattered the illusion of safety she had built. And now, with every step he took closer, the trap was closing. Grant moved with deliberate caution, scanning the tunnel, every movement precise and measured. Mara's mind raced. She had spent years evading detection, infiltrating networks, moving through shadows unseen. She had survived covert operations, betrayals, and the constant threat of discovery. Yet here, in the heart of Norfolk, beneath fluorescent lights and steel beams, she felt more vulnerable than ever. One misstep, one hesitation, and it would all be over. As he drew nearer, Mara's mind flicked through contingency plans. Escape routes, hidden alcoves, emergency exits, every path calculated, every angle accounted for. But the tunnel offered few options. The walls pressed in, the fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, and the distant hum of the base grew louder, a reminder that the world outside the tunnel was closing in. Her cover had to hold, and she had to hold it perfectly. Grant stopped just a few feet away, his eyes locking onto hers. There was no accusation in his gaze, only calculation and the faintest tremor of recognition. He spoke again, voice low and controlled. "I need a full report, Alvarez, now." The tone was calm, yet it carried the weight of command, of decades of experience. It was a test, subtle but deadly. Mara nodded, forcing herself to respond with precision, her voice unwavering. "Routine check completed. All systems operational, sir." Her words were flawless. The voice, the cadence, the professionalism all matched the alias she had adopted. Yet she felt it in the Admiral's eyes, the spark of doubt, the flicker of memory, the recognition that something was off. He tilted his head slightly, scanning her posture, the tension in her shoulders, the subtle tremor in her hands. And Mara realized with a jolt of fear that he could see through more than her disguise. He could see the past, the life she had tried to bury, the missions, the secrets, the years of absence. The tension in the tunnel was palpable, thick enough to taste. Mara's heart raced, her fingers shook, but she held her ground. She had come too far to falter now. She had a mission to complete, intelligence to gather, and a dangerous truth to uncover. The Admiral, despite recognizing something familiar, had not yet acted. That hesitation was her lifeline. She could use it to maneuver, to survive, to maintain the delicate balance between exposure and mission success. As the footsteps receded slightly, Grant continuing his inspection, moving past the nearest corridor, Mara allowed herself a brief, silent exhale. But she knew it was only temporary. The recognition had occurred. The game had changed. Every move from this point forward would be fraught with danger. One misstep, one flicker of emotion could unravel everything. And yet, amidst the fear and tension, a spark of determination ignited. She had faced impossible odds before. She could face them again. For now, she stayed in the shadows, clipboard in hand, pretending to examine the cables. But in the back of her mind, a single thought burned brighter than the fluorescent lights above. Admiral Grant knew something. And soon, that knowledge would force both of them into a confrontation that could expose secrets long buried and risk lives beyond measure. The narrow tunnel felt like a cage, its walls closing in as Mara pressed herself against the cold steel, heart hammering like a war drum. Admiral Grant's steps echoed closer, precise and measured, each one slicing through the silence with inevitability. She could hear his breath, controlled and steady, the voice of a man who had led thousands through chaos and combat, yet whose instincts were now keyed directly to her. Every instinct Mara possessed screamed that the moment of reckoning had arrived, and there was nowhere to hide. Her disguise had carried her this far. The oversized sunglasses, the borrowed uniform, the fake ID, and the careful mimicry of a technician's mannerisms. But the recognition in the Admiral's gaze had pierced it all. She felt exposed in a way she hadn't since she disappeared from the public eye years ago. Her past and present collided violently, a storm of memories that left her breathless. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a mission she could rehearse in training rooms or simulated corridors. This was real life. Lives were at stake, and one misstep could ignite a chain reaction that would destroy everything she had worked to protect. Grant moved deliberately, scanning every corner, every shadow. The air between them was taut with unspoken recognition, a silent standoff more dangerous than any firefight. Mara forced herself to breathe evenly, forcing her trembling hands to hold the clipboard as though it were a shield against the storm. She rehearsed her responses in her mind, precise and emotionless, each word a brick in the fragile wall she had built to separate herself from exposure. "Lieutenant Alvarez," the Admiral's voice broke the silence again, sharper this time, laced with suspicion. "Report, now." His eyes locked onto hers, the faintest flicker of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, a recognition buried deep under professionalism, almost imperceptible yet impossible to ignore. Mara's stomach twisted. That tiny expression betrayed what he had already pieced together, and she knew the moment she had feared had finally arrived. She swallowed, steadying herself. "Routine maintenance check completed, sir," she said, voice calm, measured, precise. Each syllable was deliberate, crafted to conceal the tremor of fear she felt. Her eyes stayed glued to the cables she pretended to inspect, but she felt the weight of Grant's gaze pressing down on her like the hull of a battleship. Every muscle in her body tensed, ready to react, ready to flee, ready to fight. But she knew fleeing was impossible. Not now. Not when the threads of her mission were so delicate, when the fate of the base and lives beyond it hung in precarious balance. Grant stepped closer. Mara's mind raced. If he reached out, if he touched her, if he said one word that betrayed his certainty, she would be compromised. Years of careful planning, careful disappearance, careful silence, all of it could unravel in a single heartbeat. And yet the Admiral didn't act. Instead, he studied her with a scrutiny that was almost unbearable, as if attempting to see through the uniform, through the sunglasses, and into the core of who she had become. The tunnel was silent except for their breathing and the distant hum of machinery, yet the tension was palpable, almost a physical force pressing against her chest. Every nerve screamed that he knew more than he let on, that recognition had struck deep, and that the moment of exposure was imminent. Mara's mind flashed back to moments in the field where trust had been the difference between life and death. She realized that same trust, that same instinct, now separated survival from catastrophe in this claustrophobic corridor. She had to act. She couldn't let panic betray her. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her head, eyes meeting Grant's, not with defiance, not with submission, but with measured calm. "Everything is in order, sir," she said again, voice steady, masking the torrent of fear and memories within. She hoped the lie was convincing enough, though she knew deep down that nothing would ever fool him completely. Grant tilted his head slightly, a motion that was subtle but loaded with implication. He studied her posture, the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her fingers. His instincts screamed at him, piecing together the familiar cadence of her speech, the tilt of her chin, the way her eyes lingered on details others overlooked. And then, almost imperceptibly, his pupils widened. Recognition struck him like lightning. He inhaled sharply, a silent acknowledgement, as if he had confirmed a suspicion he had refused to name for years. Mara's pulse surged. She could feel the trap tightening, the delicate web of deception she had spun threatening to collapse. Every instinct screamed that she needed to move, to vanish into the shadows, yet the tunnel offered no escape. The walls pressed in, and the distant sounds of the base closing in reminded her that seconds counted. She realized that her carefully rehearsed plans, her years of training and preparation, now faced their ultimate test, not against an enemy she could see, but against the one person who had known her deepest secrets. Then he spoke again, low and controlled. "Cole." The single word was a whisper, almost drowned by the hum of the tunnel, yet it carried a weight that reverberated through her chest. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an accusation. It was recognition, a confirmation that her past had caught up with her, and there was no running from it. Mara felt the air grow heavy, charged with the electricity of revelation, and she realized that the moment had come to make a choice: maintain her disguise or reveal the truth and risk everything. Footsteps approached from the far end of the tunnel. Security personnel, likely responding to the Admiral's earlier commands, were closing in. Mara's mind raced. She had trained for combat, for evasion, for infiltration, but never for being discovered by the one person whose trust had once been absolute. She felt panic rise, hot and immediate, yet she forced it down, channeling it into calculated calm. Her fingers hovered over the clipboard, ready to use it as both shield and tool. Grant's presence was a constant, a silent force pressing down on her. He didn't move forward aggressively, didn't draw a weapon, didn't shout orders. Instead, he watched, measured, waiting. Mara realized that he was testing her, probing her resolve, judging whether she was friend or foe. She knew she couldn't falter. One wrong glance, one misstep, and the Admiral's recognition could turn into suspicion, then action, and action in the corridors of Norfolk could have catastrophic consequences. She swallowed again, forcing herself to think. The mission was still intact. She had gathered the intelligence she needed. She had documented the anomalies, traced the suspicious orders, and tracked the shadowy signals indicating a traitor in the ranks. But her cover was slipping, and the Admiral's recognition threatened to expose not only her identity, but the entire operation. Every second she stayed in the tunnel was a gamble, and every heartbeat was a countdown to discovery. The young sailor passed again, oblivious to the tension vibrating between Mara and Grant. She forced a polite smile, a nod, pretending to check the wiring one last time. Her heart thundered and sweat slid down her neck. She felt the weight of years pressing down, the years of disappearance, the years of hiding, the years of planning for this exact moment. And now, all of it hinged on the split-second judgment of the one man who could undo it all with a single word. Grant's gaze lingered, unwavering. The recognition in his eyes had deepened, sharpened, focused. Mara realized with a jolt that he understood more than she had anticipated. Her presence here was no longer merely suspicious, it was personal. He knew her. He knew the past. And now, in the narrow confines of the tunnel, with the hum of the base surrounding them and the distant sound of approaching boots, Mara understood the truth. She was exposed. Not yet fully, but close enough that the next move, hers or his, would change everything. The tunnel seemed to shrink, the shadows stretching longer, darker. Mara's hand tightened on the clipboard, and she prepared herself for whatever came next. She had survived countless dangers, but this was different. This was recognition by a man who had once trusted her with his life, and whose judgment could determine not just her fate, but the fate of the fleet and the lives depending on it. The metallic hum of the base was suddenly pierced by a sharp, piercing alarm that reverberated through every corridor and catwalk. Mara froze, clipboard clutched like a lifeline, her lungs tightening as the lights flickered overhead. Sirens wailed, drowning out the familiar hum of machinery, and the echo of boots pounding against concrete confirmed what she had feared. Security teams were moving in, alerted by the Admiral's sudden tension. Her carefully crafted disguise, her meticulous planning, and the years she had spent in shadow had all just collided in one explosive moment. Admiral Grant's gaze remained locked on hers, unflinching, calm, and yet charged with unspoken understanding. He didn't move aggressively, didn't draw a weapon, didn't shout orders. Instead, he reached out not as an adversary, but as someone who had once known her completely, someone whose instincts screamed that the situation demanded precision, not panic. "Cole," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself, "step aside." The single word carried a weight that could have shattered steel. Mara's pulse surged. She knew she had only seconds to act. She could pretend, continue to play the part of the maintenance officer, but the alarms and approaching footsteps meant that her cover would crumble at the first inquiry from security. She needed to move, and fast, but she also knew that any hasty action could trigger a full-scale lockdown, an event that would trap her, the Admiral, and possibly hundreds of innocent personnel in a deadly tangle of confusion. Without thinking, she followed the Admiral's lead as he guided her toward a narrow blast door tucked into the corner of the tunnel. The steel felt cold under her fingertips as she touched the control panel, and the lights flickered again, casting their faces in harsh shadows. Around them, the base was a blur of motion. Security personnel rounded corners, rifles raised, radios crackling with frantic commands. Mara realized that the Admiral's calm demeanor was not just instinct, it was necessity. She had once admired that same calm in battle, and now she leaned on it as her lifeline. "Keep your voice down," Grant said, glancing back over his shoulder. "If anyone else sees you, they'll assume the worst." His eyes narrowed, piercing her through the thin veil of her disguise. Mara nodded, forcing her hands to stop trembling as she followed him. She couldn't allow fear to show, not now, not ever. Lives depended on their ability to remain undetected, at least for the moment. The blast door slid open with a hiss, revealing a small maintenance alcove barely large enough for two people. Mara stepped inside, the sound of the alarm muffled but still a constant presence. Grant followed, securing the door behind them. The space was cramped, lined with pipes and electrical conduits, lit by a harsh overhead bulb. Mara's breathing slowed slightly, though her mind was racing. They were trapped in a pocket of safety, but only temporarily. Outside, chaos was building. Grant studied her carefully, his face a mask of authority, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something deeper: curiosity, suspicion, recognition, and perhaps even a measure of relief. "Why are you here?" he asked, voice low but urgent. "After all these years, why now?" The words cut through the noise, echoing in the confined space. Mara felt her throat tighten, the weight of her secrets pressing against her chest. She opened her mouth to answer, but the lights above flickered violently and a distant explosion rattled the building. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the metallic taste of tension filled the air. Mara's heart skipped a beat. The base was under threat. The very mission that had brought her back into this place was now accelerating beyond her control. She swallowed hard and spoke, her voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline. "There's a traitor, sir, someone inside the fleet. Orders are being falsified and systems compromised. I came to confirm it, to gather proof before it was too late." Her eyes searched his face, gauging his reaction. Grant's jaw tightened, and for a moment his expression betrayed the gravity of the situation. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. "We don't have time to debate past choices," he said. "You came here for a reason. Show me what you found." Mara moved to the side, producing a small encrypted device she had carried, the size of a thumb drive, from a hidden pocket. She handed it to him, her fingers brushing his momentarily, sending a shock of recognition through both of them. Grant's eyes flickered over the device, then back to her, weighing trust against the chaos surrounding them. Outside the blast door, muffled shouts and the sharp clicks of weapons signaled that security was intensifying its search. Mara knew that every second spent explaining, every word spoken, increased the risk of discovery. She had to work fast. Grant inserted the device into a secure terminal embedded in the wall, and the small screen lit up, displaying a cascade of classified orders, anomalies, and encrypted messages. Her eyes scanned the lines, confirming that the threat was real: falsified orders, misdirected fleet movements, and unauthorized communications. She pointed to one set of coordinates blinking ominously on the map. "Here," she said, "a weapon, mobile and undetected. The timeline matches last week's suspicious activity. If it reaches the coast, Norfolk could be in danger." Grant's face hardened. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. He glanced at her, weighing her words against the decades of instinct and experience he had relied on. "Cole, how did you get back in without anyone noticing? This shouldn't have been possible." His voice was calm, but the tension behind it was palpable. Mara's jaw tightened, a mix of pride and frustration flashing in her expression. She had done what was necessary, yet it had placed her directly in the eye of a storm she could no longer fully control. Another explosion rattled the walls above, and the alcove shuddered. Mara felt the air shift, the vibrations traveling through her body. She realized with a jolt that the base was no longer just a backdrop for reconnaissance. It was now a battlefield, and she and the Admiral were at its center. Security forces moved like ghosts outside the blast door, searching, questioning, firing warnings, their radios crackling with urgency. Grant's voice cut through the tension. "We need to move, now. Show me the exit routes and the hidden terminals. We don't have a minute to waste." Mara nodded, pulling him along as she led the way through a network of tunnels she had mapped meticulously. Every step was calculated, every turn measured. They moved quickly but silently, shadows in a web of steel and light. Yet even as they navigated the maze, Mara felt the weight of their exposure. She had been recognized, and that recognition had escalated the threat exponentially. The Admiral, once her ally in countless operations, now represented both salvation and risk. One misstep from him, one slip of his tongue, could reveal her presence to the hundreds of sailors and officers moving through the base. They reached a junction, the faint glow of an emergency light casting their shadows long across the walls. Mara paused, listening to the footsteps approaching from multiple directions. The base had shifted from routine to chaos, and they were trapped in a moving cage. Grant placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, not a command but a gesture of trust. Mara felt a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in years: reassurance. Yet it was fleeting, tempered by the knowledge that the alarms and approaching security forces meant danger was seconds away. "Stay close," he whispered, "and remember every move counts. One mistake, yours or mine, could cost lives." Mara nodded, heart hammering, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She realized that their survival depended not only on skill and speed but on trust, the fragile, tenuous trust that had survived a decade apart and now had to endure the chaos of imminent exposure. End of Part 4. Suspense. The blast doors, the alarms, and the approaching security forces had transformed Norfolk into a ticking time bomb. Mara had successfully avoided immediate detection, but with Admiral Grant fully aware of her presence, every step forward was a gamble. Would they make it to safety? Or would the Admiral's recognition trigger a chain of events that could expose her mission and endanger the entire base? The tension was at a breaking point, and the next move would decide everything. The blast door hissed closed behind them, sealing Mara and Admiral Grant in a small, dimly lit maintenance alcove beneath the hangar. Dust swirled in the narrow space, illuminated by the emergency lights, giving the room the appearance of a scene frozen in amber. Outside, the base had erupted into controlled chaos, alarms shrieking, radios crackling, and the distant, metallic clatter of boots on steel echoing through the labyrinth of corridors. Mara could hear the precise cadence of security teams moving toward their position, and she knew that at any moment, their fragile sanctuary could be breached. She exhaled slowly, forcing her racing heart to steady. Her hands hovered over the encrypted device she had brought, a small, palm-sized drive containing evidence of a plot so intricate it threatened the entire fleet. Grant's eyes followed her every movement, sharp and calculating, as if he were weighing the trustworthiness of each gesture, each breath. He had once trusted her with missions that could decide life and death in real time. Now, in the confines of this claustrophobic alcove, that trust had to be reaffirmed in seconds. "Explain," Grant commanded, his tone low but edged with urgency. "I don't have time for explanations that don't matter. Lives are at stake." His gaze was unwavering, piercing through the uniform she had assumed. Mara met his eyes, drawing on the confidence and composure she had cultivated over years in hiding. "There's a traitor," she said, her voice deliberate and controlled. "Someone with access to fleet operations. Orders are being falsified, movements redirected, and communications intercepted. I came back to verify the intel and collect proof." She gestured toward the device. "Everything I have gathered is in here, but the situation is already active. If we don't act fast, there's no telling how many will be at risk." Grant's jaw tightened. His eyes scanned the alcove, calculating the risks, mentally mapping the position of security forces and emergency exits. The hum of the base had shifted. What had been routine operations now resembled a battlefield. Mara realized with a jolt that their isolation was temporary. The base was alive, moving, searching, and the moment they stepped out would determine whether they were partners in survival or targets to be neutralized. "Show me," he said finally, his voice taut with the gravity of command. "I need everything now." Mara nodded, quickly inserting the device into the secure terminal embedded in the alcove wall. Instantly, the screen lit up, displaying a cascade of classified orders, anomalous fleet movements, and encrypted messages flagged with priority warnings. Holographic coordinates flickered across the display, mapping out suspicious activity along the eastern seaboard. Her finger hovered over a blinking dot moving toward Norfolk, impossibly fast and seemingly undetected. "Here," she said, pointing. "This object, or weapon, matches the anomalies we've been tracking for weeks. If it reaches the coast, it could compromise the entire fleet and civilian infrastructure." Grant's eyes narrowed as he absorbed the information, his face a mask of concentration and simmering fury. "Who else knows about this?" he demanded, leaning closer to examine the screen. Mara shook her head. "No one," she said. "Only you and me. The intel chain is compromised. The traitor is higher up than anyone suspects." Her words hung in the air like a knife suspended over the tunnel floor. The implication was clear. They were alone against a threat embedded within the very command structure of the fleet. A distant explosion rattled the ceiling, sending a shower of dust into the alcove. Mara flinched, but Grant's hand on her shoulder grounded her. "Focus," he said. "We need actionable moves, not fear." She nodded, drawing a deep, steadying breath. Outside, the base had moved from panic to calculated mobilization. The automated defenses were online, and fighter jets streaked across the hangar decks, but the central problem, the traitor, remained unseen, a shadow within the chain of command that could strike at any moment. Mara began walking him through the anomalies she had documented. Falsified orders rerouted to empty ports, automated drone patrols that had been hacked, supply chain manipulations intended to create gaps in defensive coverage. Each revelation tightened the knot of tension in the Admiral's chest, and Mara felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. Years of planning, years of observation, and every resource she had gathered boiled down to this fragile corridor, her words the only shield between catastrophe and safety. Grant absorbed the data quickly, his decades of experience allowing him to separate the signal from the noise. "If this is accurate," he said, voice tight, "the traitor has already compromised multiple systems. That means we're dealing with someone with access at the highest levels, someone who knows how we think." He paused, eyes flicking to Mara. "And you're saying you've confirmed it?" She met his gaze steady. "Yes, sir, but there's more. The movement patterns, they suggest the traitor has a timeline. They intend for something to reach Norfolk within hours." The tension in the alcove was suffocating. Mara felt a bead of sweat trace down her spine. Every instinct screamed that the next decisions would ripple far beyond this small, dusty room. The security teams outside were moving like shadows, the hum of activity magnified by the enclosed walls. Any misstep, one word, one glance, one pause, could expose her identity and unravel everything. Yet she had come too far to falter now. Grant exhaled sharply, running a hand through his graying hair. "We need a plan, and fast. Evacuations, lockdowns, tactical response teams, all of it needs to be coordinated without tipping off the traitor that we know." His voice was calm, but every syllable carried urgency, precision, and the weight of command. Mara nodded, feeling a surge of adrenaline. This was the moment she had prepared for, a moment where knowledge, trust, and courage converged. She led him to the hidden terminal, explaining how she had mapped secure data streams and prepped contingency protocols. Each step was critical. Every piece of information could mean the difference between saving lives and losing them. She detailed how she had intercepted communications, documented falsified commands, and tracked suspicious movement patterns within the fleet. Grant listened, absorbing everything, occasionally asking pointed questions, his analytical mind dissecting her findings with a precision that left her simultaneously impressed and terrified. Another explosion shook the ceiling, closer this time, and the lights flickered violently. Dust rained down around them. Mara felt the vibrations through her boots, a reminder that the clock was running and that the threat was accelerating. She pressed herself against the wall, forcing her racing heart to calm as she continued her briefing. Grant's eyes never left her, a constant, unblinking assessment of her truthfulness and her commitment to the mission. Suddenly, the alcove doors rattled under pressure from security teams outside. Radios crackled with commands, warnings, and scattered instructions. Mara realized that their sanctuary was only temporary. The base had been fully alerted, and every second they spent inside this alcove was another second closer to detection. She had to act, to move, to coordinate, and to stay alive, while keeping her true identity hidden from everyone else who might see her. Grant's voice cut through the tension. "We have minutes, not hours. Evacuation routes are limited and the traitor is likely monitoring every channel. You need to show me how to neutralize the threat without triggering a full-scale panic. Can you do it?" Mara's eyes locked on his, the weight of trust and responsibility heavy between them. She nodded. "I can, but it will require precision, timing, and absolute secrecy. One mistake and," she didn't finish, letting the implication hang. "Lives, fleets, civilians, all balanced on a knife's edge." Grant studied her, reading the determination and calm beneath the tension. He exhaled, a long, steadying breath. "Then we do this together," he said, voice firm. "We move smart, fast, and coordinated. Show me the first step." Mara motioned toward the terminal, pointing out critical access points, security blind spots, and the timing sequences she had meticulously charted. Every detail mattered. Every second counted. The distant sound of the base in emergency mode was a constant reminder of the stakes. The alarms, the footsteps, the hum of engines, all merged into a mechanical heartbeat that mirrored their own racing pulses. Mara felt the fragile web of deception she had maintained for years stretching to its limit. Yet in the midst of chaos, she felt a spark of clarity. Together, she and the Admiral could confront this threat. They were not alone in intellect, courage, and strategy, yet the exposure of her identity remained a ticking bomb. The alcove felt smaller with each passing second. Outside, the alarms had grown sharper, more insistent, echoing like gunfire through the steel corridors of Norfolk. Mara's fingers hovered over the encrypted terminal, her pulse hammering in rhythm with the distant clatter of boots on concrete. Every second brought them closer to detection, and the realization was cold and absolute. They were no longer observers. They were active participants in a crisis that could unravel the fleet. Grant studied the device she had handed him, eyes narrowing over the flood of information. The terminal displayed a dizzying array of data, falsified orders, rerouted drone patrols, and supply chain manipulations designed to create strategic vulnerabilities. Yet the most chilling revelation was the trajectory of a small, unidentified object moving along the continental shelf toward Norfolk. The speed, the timing, the coordinates. It was designed to arrive in hours, undetected, and it had the potential to cripple the fleet before anyone could intervene. "This isn't just a leak," Grant muttered, his jaw tightening. "This is coordinated, someone high up with access to systems we trust implicitly. Someone who knows how to mask movements, falsify commands, and manipulate timing, and they've already begun the countdown." His eyes flicked to Mara. "You're saying this is confirmed?" She nodded. "Yes, I tracked the anomalies for weeks. The object matches the pattern exactly. Whoever's behind this knows our protocols, our schedules. They know the fleet like the back of their hand." Her voice was calm, but inside, adrenaline pulsed through her veins like fire. She had trained for scenarios like this, yet nothing could replicate the pressure of standing in the belly of Norfolk with the Admiral, facing an invisible enemy who could strike at any moment. Grant ran a hand through his graying hair, tension coiling in every line of his face. "If this is correct, we're dealing with a traitor embedded in command. Not just one person, Mara, someone with authority, someone who can issue orders without question. We need precision, speed, and above all, secrecy." Mara swallowed, the weight of responsibility pressing down like a steel plate on her chest. She nodded. "I have a plan. There's a secondary terminal hidden beneath the main hangar. I mapped it during my reconnaissance. It's outside regular security monitoring. From there, we can reroute the countermeasures, intercept communications, and neutralize the threat without alerting the rest of the base. But it will require timing, coordination, and your trust. Grant's gaze sharpened. Trust is earned, Mara. I trust your skills, but the situation doesn't forgive hesitation. We move fast or lives are lost. He rose, stepping closer to the terminal. Show me how to use the secondary system. Every second counts. She led him through a narrow passageway, weaving past ventilation shafts and support beams. The hum of the base surrounded them, punctuated by the distant crackle of radios and the clatter of boots on steel. Every turn brought new tension. Security personnel were everywhere, sweeping corridors, checking access points, and responding to the alarms that now screamed across the facility. Mara felt the weight of the disguise pressing down again. The uniform, the sunglasses, the false identity, thin shields against detection in a storm of trained eyes. Finally, they reached the secondary terminal, hidden behind a maintenance panel in a rarely used control corridor. Mara opened the panel, revealing a compact device connected to a secure network. She gestured to Grant. "This is it. From here, we can monitor all communications, reroute patrols, and intercept the object before it reaches the coast." Grant leaned in, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Show me," he said, voice taut. Mara moved beside him, guiding his hands through the commands she had pre-programmed. "Start here," she instructed. "This sequence isolates the compromised channels. Then we tap into encrypted drone patrol data. Finally, we inject a countermeasure protocol into the trajectory system. Timing is critical. If we're off by even a minute, the object reaches Norfolk before interception." As they worked, the alcove shook again from distant explosions. Mara's heart raced, but her hands moved with practiced precision. Grant's eyes remained focused, absorbing the instructions, executing her sequences with exactitude. The tension was palpable, a coiled spring threatening to snap. Every second they spent inside the alcove was a step closer to neutralizing the threat or to total disaster. Mara's mind flicked back to the traitor. Whoever was behind this had planned meticulously, anticipating countermeasures, anticipating interference. It wasn't enough to act blindly. Every command had to be calculated, precise, and synchronized with fleet operations. She explained the timing in exacting detail, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her body. Grant listened, absorbing the information with military precision. "If this works," he said, his tone steady but strained, "we intercept the object before it reaches Norfolk. But the traitor, they'll know someone is interfering. We need to act quickly." He inserted a secure keycard into the secondary terminal, and the holographic map flickered to life, displaying the fleet, patrols, and the trajectory of the incoming object. Mara pointed to a blinking dot, heart hammering. "There," she said. "That's the point of no return. If it crosses this line, interception becomes impossible." Grant's eyes narrowed. "Then we have no choice. We move now. Initiate the sequence." Mara's fingers flew across the keyboard, initiating protocols that would reroute drones, intercept communications, and neutralize the incoming threat. Each command executed successfully, yet the tension never lessened. Every second was measured, every movement critical. The terminal displayed a countdown, accelerating toward zero. Outside, the alarms grew louder, security forces now fully aware of anomalies in the system. Mara glanced at Grant, whose jaw was set, eyes fixed on the screen. "We're close," she said, voice low. "But the traitor may detect the changes. They'll try to intervene." Suddenly, the screen flickered. Communications channels surged with unexpected signals, drones shifted off course, and a warning flashed. Unauthorized override detected. Mara's stomach dropped. The traitor was reacting faster than anticipated. Grant's fingers moved with practiced speed, rerouting commands, isolating compromised channels, and stabilizing the network. Every second was a battle against unseen forces, a race against time and human cunning. "Keep calm," Grant instructed, voice taut with urgency. "We're almost there." Mara's hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to focus, guiding him through the final steps. The countdown approached zero, and the trajectory of the incoming object hung in the balance. One misstep, one hesitation, and Norfolk could be destroyed before anyone even realized what had happened. Then with a sharp beep, the system stabilized. The object's trajectory shifted, slowed, and finally stalled. The incoming threat had been intercepted, neutralized before it could reach the coast. Mara exhaled, relief flooding through her, but it was tempered by the realization that the traitor was still at large. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Grant turned to her, eyes intense, voice low. "You did it, but now we need to find the traitor, and fast. They're embedded somewhere inside this base." Mara nodded, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. The success of the mission had bought them time, but the next phase, the hunt, would be even more dangerous. Outside the alcove, the base had begun to stabilize, but the shadow of the traitor loomed large. Mara and Grant exchanged a silent understanding. The mission was only halfway complete. The deception, the danger, and the high-stakes tension were far from over. And as they prepared to move deeper into the heart of Norfolk, Mara knew one truth. Exposure was inevitable, and the moment when the Admiral fully recognized her would come, and it could change everything. The base was no longer the orderly machine Mara had once known. It had transformed into a living, breathing entity of chaos. Sirens wailed, boots thundered, and the smell of scorched metal and dust hung thick in the corridors. The emergency lights flickered violently, casting long, trembling shadows that made the steel walls feel like the ribs of a giant mechanical predator. Every sound, every echo, sharpened Mara's nerves. She moved beside Admiral Grant, every step precise, every breath calculated. They had neutralized the immediate threat, but the true danger, the traitor embedded within the command structure, was still out there, unseen, watching, waiting. Mara's mind raced. The encrypted device she had brought, the secondary terminal they had used to intercept the incoming object, and the careful mapping of anomalies had bought them precious time, but time alone wouldn't expose the traitor. They needed intelligence. They needed proof. And above all, they needed stealth. Every corridor they passed could contain a hostile officer, a security team unaware of the interception, or the traitor themselves. Every face they encountered had the potential to turn their mission into disaster. Grant's voice broke the tense silence. "We need to split their focus, draw security toward the anomalies we intercepted, and leave a clear path to the control center. That's where the traitor is likely coordinating." His fingers danced across a tablet, sending digital signals to reroute teams. Mara watched him, impressed. His calm under pressure, his ability to strategize in real time, reminded her why he had commanded fleets and missions that others would have called impossible. And yet, despite his precision, Mara felt the weight of the moment. If he realized her true identity, if recognition turned into suspicion in the wrong hands, everything could unravel. They reached a junction, the faint glow of red emergency lights illuminating the path ahead. Mara motioned toward a service elevator, rarely used and known only to a few technicians. "This will take us close to the control center," she whispered. "But security sweeps are frequent. Timing is everything." Grant nodded, eyes sharp. They pressed the call button, and the elevator descended with a low groan, shaking as if protesting their intrusion. Inside, the small cab felt suffocating. Mara's chest rose and fell rapidly, not from exertion but from the constant tightrope tension of operating under full exposure. Her mind replayed scenarios she had trained for, simulations she had run countless times, yet nothing had fully prepared her for the reality of being recognized, of the Admiral knowing, of her past converging violently with the present. Grant, standing rigid beside her, seemed to sense her unease but said nothing. His focus was absolute, and that steadiness became her anchor. The elevator opened onto a dim service floor that ran along the periphery of the control center. Mara peered through a narrow grate, glimpsing officers moving like ants, monitors glowing with tactical data, and shadows shifting as personnel monitored the incoming anomalies. Somewhere in this hive of activity was the traitor. Mara's stomach knotted. Whoever it was, they had intimate knowledge of the fleet's operations, the communication networks, and the very security protocols they had just bypassed. One wrong step would alert them, and the consequences could be catastrophic. "Stay close," Grant whispered. "We move as one. Eyes open, ears open, mind open." Mara nodded, matching his cadence, her every sense sharpened to a razor edge. They slipped along the service corridors, silent as shadows, using every concealment she had memorized during her reconnaissance. Every flicker of movement outside the narrow hallway made her heart leap, every metallic clang a potential alarm. Finally, they reached a terminal overlooking the control hub. Mara tapped into the secure feed, her fingers flying across the interface. She traced command orders, communications, and movements with meticulous care. The anomalies she had documented weeks before were now concentrated in one officer's activity, someone embedded high within the command chain. A ripple of recognition passed through Grant as he scanned the data. "There," he said, jaw tight. "They've manipulated drone patrols, rerouted communications, and falsified fleet positions. It's precise, deliberate, and there, inside the control hub." Mara's pulse surged. The traitor was closer than they had anticipated. Every second they delayed increased the risk. Outside the alcove, footsteps echoed with unnerving regularity. She glanced at Grant, whose gaze was fixed, unyielding, calculating every variable. They had to act now. She outlined a plan, split the focus of security with controlled anomalies, isolate the compromised channels, and approach the officer without triggering suspicion. It was a delicate dance, requiring speed, precision, and flawless execution. As they prepared to move, a sudden flash of movement caught Mara's eye. An officer lingered near one of the terminals, unusually still, monitoring the data streams with intent that went beyond routine observation. Her heart clenched. That had to be the traitor. She signaled Grant, who adjusted his stance, positioning himself to cover their approach. Every step they took now carried the weight of life and death. They edged closer, moving in perfect synchronization. Mara's mind raced, calculating every possible contingency, every escape route, every diversion. She knew the officer could detect anomalies at any moment, and the risk of exposure was critical. Yet, despite the tension, she felt a measure of exhilaration, the kind that came from standing at the precipice of a mission where failure was not an option. Grant's voice broke the silence, low and deliberate. "On my mark," he signaled, and they moved together, closing the distance to the terminal where the traitor worked. The officer's back was to them, fingers tapping commands into the system. Mara's heart pounded as she prepared for confrontation. One wrong move, one hesitation, and the entire base would erupt into chaos. Suddenly, the officer froze, sensing their presence, or perhaps reacting to the anomalies Mara and Grant had introduced. Security feeds flickered as the traitor attempted to cover their tracks. Mara acted instinctively, moving toward the terminal to isolate the channels, while Grant positioned himself to prevent escape. Their coordinated movements were fluid, almost preternatural, a combination of Mara's reconnaissance and Grant's battlefield instinct. "Stop," the officer barked, spinning around with a weapon drawn. Recognition flashed in their eyes. Mara's identity, her uniform, her proximity, everything was now fully visible. The base seemed to hold its breath. Every soldier in the vicinity paused mid-action, the alarms continuing their relentless wail. Mara's disguise had failed, and the moment of confrontation had arrived. Grant stepped forward, authoritative and calm. "Enough," he commanded. "Step away from the terminal, you're compromised." The officer hesitated, calculating options, realizing that the element of surprise was gone. Mara's pulse surged as she moved closer to stabilize the network and secure the data, while Grant kept the officer contained. The tension was almost unbearable, the collision of past recognition, present exposure, and imminent danger electrifying the room. Then, just as the officer made a sudden lunge toward the network terminal, Mara activated a countermeasure she had prepared weeks ago. The screen flickered, communications froze, and the officer was forced back, trapped in a digital lockdown. Grant moved instantly, securing the officer and directing security to isolate them. The balance of power shifted, but only slightly. The traitor had been contained, But the revelation of Mara's identity now loomed over the operation like a storm cloud ready to break. Mara exhaled slowly, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had survived recognition, neutralized the traitor's immediate actions, and maintained operational control. Yet the weight of exposure pressed down on her. Grant's gaze met hers, a mixture of relief, admiration, and unspoken questions lingering in his eyes. The recognition that had started this chain of events was now fully realized, and the delicate thread of trust they shared would be tested to its limits in the moments ahead. The control hub was alive with tension, a living web of lights, alarms, and panicked murmurs. Mara stood beside Admiral Grant, her heart still racing from the confrontation with the traitor. Security teams had moved in to contain the rogue officer, while other personnel scrambled to re-establish the compromised systems. Yet the weight of what had just occurred pressed down on her. She had been fully recognized, fully exposed, and now the Admiral knew her identity, and with it, the past she had carefully hidden for a decade. Grant's gaze remained fixed on her, unwavering, assessing not just her skills but the courage, precision, and loyalty that had allowed her to act under impossible pressure. The recognition that had begun weeks before, through voice, instinct, and subtle intuition, was now complete. He knew who she was. He knew what she had accomplished. And in that recognition, a mix of emotions flickered across his face. Relief, admiration, disbelief, and perhaps something deeper, trust reborn. Mara's fingers hovered over the terminal, still tracing the lines of the compromised network. The traitor's attempts to manipulate systems had been neutralized, but the aftershocks remained. The base's communications were fragmented, patrols were confused, and the automated systems required careful recalibration. Every second counted. The faintest misstep could undo the delicate balance they had fought so hard to restore. Mara had anticipated this contingency, and now her plans had to unfold flawlessly. Grant stepped beside her, voice low but firm. "We have to secure every system, reroute every channel, and verify every fleet movement. The traitor may have accomplices. We cannot leave anything unchecked." His presence was both a shield and a challenge. Mara nodded, feeling the gravity of operating not only as an operative but as someone fully exposed, fully known by a man whose judgment could alter the course of events in an instant. She guided him through the sequences, her hands moving with the precision of years of training. Commands were executed, systems recalibrated, and compromised channels isolated. Outside, the base slowly began to stabilize, though every alarm, every shuffle of boots, reminded them that danger was not yet over. Mara felt the tension press into her chest like steel bands. Recognition had come with relief, yes, but also with a new vulnerability. Every move she made now was under scrutiny, every action measured by the man who had once trusted her completely, and whose trust she could not afford to betray. The traitor had been neutralized for the moment, but Mara knew the operation was far from over. The officer's communications suggested a larger network of infiltration, a web of deception spanning multiple levels of command. Mara's mind raced, calculating the next steps: contain the threat, secure the intelligence, restore operational integrity, and ensure that the fleet remained safe. Every element had to be precise, or the cost would be catastrophic. Grant's voice broke her reverie. "Cole," he said, using her real name for the first time in the crisis, "we need confirmation of all anomalies before we can fully restore command. Can you provide it?" Mara met his gaze, feeling the weight of that single word. Using her name, recognizing her, shifted the dynamic. Trust had been established, yes, but exposure also meant responsibility. She nodded. "Yes, sir. I can verify everything, but we'll need uninterrupted access to the network for the next 15 minutes. Any interference could compromise the verification." Grant's eyes flicked to the security teams moving through the control hub. He exhaled sharply. "You'll have it." He gestured toward the officers, who immediately recognized his authority and held their positions, allowing Mara and him the room to operate. Mara felt a rush of relief tempered by adrenaline. The trust was real, operational, and necessary, but so fragile. Every second was now a balance of risk and reward. As Mara ran the verification sequences, Grant remained close, observing the holographic displays with a surgeon's precision. Every blinking light, every line of code, every fleet movement was scrutinized. The screens showed a clear picture, all systems rerouted, compromised channels neutralized, and the trajectory of the unidentified object, once moving toward Norfolk at dangerous speed, now fully under control. The threat had been contained. Lives, fleets, and the integrity of the base had been preserved. Yet even as the immediate danger subsided, Mara knew that the revelation of her identity could have repercussions. Personnel had seen her face, some had glimpsed her interactions with the Admiral, and rumors would ripple through the ranks. But Grant's presence was a stabilizing force. His recognition validated her actions, authorized her continued role, and ensured that the mission remained intact. For the first time in years, Mara felt the weight of exposure balanced by purpose. Grant finally spoke, voice steady but edged with emotion. "You've done more than I could have imagined. The base, the fleet, the lives aboard those vessels, they're safe because of you." His gaze softened, carrying layers of history, trust, and respect. Mara exhaled slowly, tension slowly draining from her body, replaced by a quiet, simmering relief. Recognition had been inevitable. Exposure had been unavoidable. But survival, precision, and loyalty had prevailed. The control hub slowly returned to routine operations, personnel moving with cautious efficiency, the alarms silenced, and the lights stabilized. Mara allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, though the adrenaline still thrummed through her veins. She looked at Grant, seeing in his eyes a reflection of her own mixed emotions: relief, respect, and something unspoken, an acknowledgement of the bond forged in crisis, trust rebuilt in the fire of danger. "Admiral," Mara began, her voice low, careful, yet tinged with a vulnerability rarely permitted in these walls. "The threat is contained, but the larger network may still exist. We'll need continued monitoring, deeper investigation, and coordination with fleet intelligence to ensure no further compromise." Grant nodded, expression firm yet carrying a quiet approval. "Agreed, and we'll do it together. Your skills, your insight, and your experience, recognized or not, have proven invaluable. Let's finish this operation and ensure every channel is secure. Then we can address the other matters." He paused, eyes flicking toward her, the faintest shadow of a smile tugging at his lips. Recognition had come full circle, but now trust, respect, and shared purpose guided the next steps. Mara felt a rare, profound sense of accomplishment. Years of preparation, of observation, of sacrifice, and of careful concealment had led to this moment. The Admiral had recognized her, yes, but he had also trusted her in full, authorized her actions, and allowed her to operate with both autonomy and partnership. The base, the fleet, and countless lives had been preserved, and the fragile web of secrecy had endured long enough to make a difference. As the final verification sequences completed and the last compromised channel was restored, Mara and Grant stood side by side, surveying the control hub. The tension that had gripped Norfolk for hours slowly eased, replaced by the quiet hum of restored order. But in that moment, Mara understood that recognition was more than exposure. It was validation, connection, and the rekindling of trust that had once defined her partnership with the Admiral. Outside the control hub, emergency lights gave way to normal illumination, and the base's operations gradually resumed their structured rhythm. Personnel moved with a mix of relief and lingering caution, aware that the crisis had been averted, yet mindful that vigilance was essential. Mara allowed herself a small exhale, feeling the weight of hours of tension lift incrementally. She had navigated recognition, exposure, and high-stakes crisis, and survived. Grant turned to her, voice calm but carrying the gravity of unspoken acknowledgement. "You've proven yourself today, Cole," he said, emphasizing her true name once more. "Not just as an operative, but as someone I can trust implicitly. The fleet owes you a debt it will never fully understand." Mara met his gaze, words unneeded between them. Recognition, trust, and the bond forged in crisis spoke louder than any report, commendation, or title ever could.